Are you there, Rob?
Yeah, I'm here. Morning, guys.
All right. Hey, good morning, guys. Happy to be with you guys during this time, even if it's virtual. I think the goal of this group has grown, and I am so proud to be part of this group and seen it grow over the last few years. And every time that I get to present or participate or do anything, I'm just happy to do it. First thing I would say, this presentation is fairly simple. The way I look at any presentation that I do is I always try to think about just having a one-on-one conversation with a buddy at Starbucks, and they ask me a question, hey, what do you do for mobility? And so I always have ideas. I like to mix things up. And, Rob and I put together some of the ideas that we share. Rob and I were together for 1 year, and it was a great time. Rob is really well versed in mobility. So what we want to do is the goal of the presentation is just to give you ideas that we have, give you things that we actually use, give you some parameters of how to use them, and so that you can just take this presentation and use it right away. So this is not something that has a lot of research that you have to look up. This is something like turnkey. You take it, you use it, and we have ideas for you how to plug them in. I think right now the world of strength conditioning, mobility is a big buzzword, but the reality of it is this thing has been around forever. If anybody's been involved in physical therapy or anything like that, mobility has been around forever. So with the influx of all these mobility training ideas, we thought we'd just share a few of our ideas. Go ahead and turn to the first one. So the simple purpose of what we're going to show you is just provide some practical mobility training ideas. This is exactly some of the things that we did last year. Some of the movement expressions, as I call them, I've been doing them for years, and it's been in martial arts for years. And then just a few definitions, because I'm big on defining things: mobility, flexibility, stability. I think they're all three are different, but they cross over, and it's important for us to know that. Go ahead and. Of a muscle lengthen passively through the range of motion, whereas mobility is the ability of a joint to move actively through the range of motion. Go ahead. And then stability is the ability to maintain control of joint movement or position by coordinating actions or surrounding tissues and the neuromuscular system. Slide. Like I said, there's a lot of mobility methods out there. I call them methods because I feel like everyone has their own methodology. They call it different things. These are some of the ones that we thought of as we were putting this presentation together, but there are others such as the Ido Portal, Animal Flow. There's so many of these things, but in the methodology.
We're losing you, Jose. We can't hear what you're saying. I'm going to go ahead and pick this up. Just clicking over to the next slide until. Yeah, we're losing you a little bit. I'm gonna go ahead and continue, and then when the internet picks back up, you feel free to jump in. But I think what Jose is saying, there's a lot of different methods out there. Mobility is a bit of a buzzword out there. I think we've all been exposed to some of the different teachings and certifications that are currently out there and available to our industry. But some of the commonalities that these things have would be, the first one is just simply to increase range of motion. The second would be seeking to control that range of motion that we're targeting. And then the third and ultimate one is to be able to express that range of motion, meaning we want to improve our movement quality. At the end of the day, that's what we are all after. So for the purpose of this presentation, we're simply going to focus on ways to do that within the ankle, the hip, the spine, shoulders, and then again, some movement expressions within the total body. So I'll start off with just looking at something as simple as a passive stretch. I'm sure all of you have seen a slant board at one point or time. This is a great way to just, if I decided to focus on ankle dorsiflexion, to be able to put that into play in a passive stretch. It allows the athlete to really relax, to be able to be supported by a wall and simply sit into that stretch. Many of the methods that we have looked at do recommend even over 2 minutes, but we felt as a group, Jose and I felt that 2 minutes was a pretty safe place to start for passive stretching. Again, if you don't have a slant board, you could simply use a wall. And over here on this example on the right, this is one where I am just simply loading up the torso on top of the thigh and loading that position a little bit, trying to keep the heel in contact with the ground and driving that ankle comfortably into dorsiflexion and or end range of motion. Again, a lot of different systems, a lot of different methods. This may be a position where you decide to add some isometric pushes and pulls. So pushing into plantar flexion, pulling up, or at least the feeling of trying to lift the toes up off of the ground into dorsiflexion. And then some recommendations on where you might start for sets, reps, and time. So again, we've kind of tried to target increasing that range of motion. Some examples of controlling that range of motion might be something as simple as the banded dorsiflexion exercise. Now, I'm sure everyone's seen some form of this, but we could simply do it for reps, or we could even do it for hold. So I could hold up in the dorsiflexion for a period of time, or I could go plantar flexion, dorsiflexion for actual repetitions. And then moving on to ankle circles, ankle cars, whatever you choose to call them. I'm simply supporting the leg so that I can focus on the ankle, and I'm trying to draw as big of a possible circle as I can with that ankle. So again, just trying to maximize every range that I have available to me, especially if I have temporarily opened some range in some of the passive stretching that I chose to do. Another example of an ankle control would be just in a deep squat position. This one's a little bit more loaded, but simply just doing some ankle circles in each direction. Moving on to a more dynamic movement expression, just be some ankle hops, trying to actively pull my toes up and get into dorsiflexion. This looks a little bit better when you have actual athletes doing it, but I think you guys get the idea. Moving on to the hip. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this position, frequently called the 90-90 position, lead legs at 90 degrees, back knee is off the lead leg heel, also close to 90 degrees there. And for this particular position, I'm just targeting the lead leg, posterior hip capsule. One cueing, one area where you could cue is instructing your athletes to try to extend their belly button over the lead leg to help you sit into that posterior hip capsule. And again, looking to hold this stretch for approximately 2 minutes, recommending 1 to 2 reps per leg. If I wanted to target hip internal rotation, I would simply start a 90-90, pull the lead leg toward the rear leg, place my hands behind myself, and then I am turning toward the rear leg, targeting hip internal rotation on that left leg, as you can see in the example. The one thing I will caution with this, this is the one example where we say working up to 2 minutes, simply because when you get into some of this hip internal rotation, you can have athletes who have hip impingements. So, that's one thing where we really want to caution not only the level of intensity, but the duration of the hold. So we recommend, starting into that stretch, get into it, fairly lightly, and then working up to 2 minutes as you get comfortable. Another example of hip control exercise, and again, these been called quite a few different names: 90-90 hip transition, hip switches. There's a lot of different names for these. So I'll go ahead and just kind of cue the video here. So recommend starting in a 90-90 position just to get the correct spacing of the legs before you start. But one note with this particular exercise, I recommend on trying to focus on maximizing external and internal rotation. So by example, I want to max out external rotation on the way up, meet in the middle, then trail leg, maximize internal rotation, can't go any further, and then meet down at the side at 90-90. This is something we generally see a lot of athletes get wrong, try to go too fast, and they never really get that close to end range on either side. So, and you could change the drill and you could focus on more internal rotation versus external rotation. But if I was going after both, this would be one way to do so. And then I'll go ahead and go over to this example on the right, and another control exercise, simply using a block on the wall as a fulcrum point and moving the leg here as it crosses midline, targeting external rotation, and the closer the foot gets to the wall, internal rotation. And this is also another example. If I wanted to add some isometric pushes and pulls, I could hold at end range and fashion a way to do so, whether that's using a strap or a stick, or even having a coach manually hold that position for me. So another hip control exercise, standing hip circles, standing hip cars, whatever you'd like to call them. Sure, we have all seen some version of this at some point, whether it's standing from quadruped, lots of different ways to do it. But athlete is coming up into full hip flexion, abducting. One note with this, recommend when you get into full hip flexion and you abduct, you may want to instruct the athlete to drop the knee just slightly. If it's too high, generally speaking, you're going to see that athlete tend to want to dump the whole hip versus actually focus on hip internal rotation or getting that femur to internally rotate before we finish the rep. So we would like to do that one both directions. Getting into the spine a little bit. This is one I really like, not just from an exercise prescription standpoint, but also as an evaluation tool. Go back. So I will play this, and this is not the best example, but kind of show you. I'm starting at the top, trying to keep the arms locked out and trying to get each spinal facet to go into flexion and extension. As you can see, when I do this, I don't get a whole lot of my thoracic region. It kind of stays relatively flat, but you do see me get a lot out of my lower lumbars. Again, this is something where, we can use an evaluation tool to see, how our athletes move and then better prescribe them, different areas of focus that we're trying to accomplish here. It's also very helpful to give some proprioceptive cues to walk our fingers down the athlete's spine so they can feel, roughly where they should be in the movement, especially if you're looking to target a specific region of the spine and or movement. So another example, giving some proprioception. This is one just using a tennis ball off the wall. Again, kind of using that tennis ball as for some proprioception and almost a fulcrum point to try to get into spinal flexion at. So again, just getting as far as I can, and then once I can no longer hold that position, simply just walking out of the exercise. Example on the right is going to be some lateral flexion. Hard to see in this example, but recommend coming into some forward flexion first, then getting into lateral flexion just to be able to clear that hip. I'm cheating a little bit. My feet should probably be closer to the wall. But again, same concept, starting high, working low, trying to peel my body off the wall. Some spinal rotation, using a block to help stabilize the hips and keep them pinned down. I have a dowel rod behind my back, and I'm simply working on some spinal rotation. So again, here's something you could do for reps, simply just taking it to end range. You could potentially hold at end range, and you could even incorporate some isometrics at end range, pushing and pulling if someone were to hold that dowel in place. Moving on to some spinal circles, trying to keep the hips nice and stable, coming into forward flexion, lateral flexion, and then getting into spinal extension, and then same thing coming back on that side. Not the best form, but something I'm working on, and a really good tool for your athletes, just in terms of, total spinal motion. Moving on to the shoulder. A little bit of a constraint here, but the ability to get into some prone shoulder flexion. Again, this is an example where if I wanted to, I could continue to build up in almost a lift-off position and make it harder and harder, taking myself closer to end range in shoulder flexion. I could also choose to hold for time and or add a isometric component if I chose to do so. Looking at a prone swimmer one, this is a really good exercise for working on both shoulder flexion and shoulder internal rotation. So as I get up into shoulder flexion, simply internally rotating, trying to hover the hands off the lower back and maintain shoulder internal rotation. I know this one comes up in a lot of different programming. Shoulder external rotation, isometric. Seen it a lot. Seen a lot of different ways to do it. This one can be difficult, especially if you have a large amount of athletes and you're in a group setting and you don't necessarily have the ability to manually hold hold an athlete's position isometrically for them. So you can kind of ignore the time that I'm actually performing this for. Recommendations are here on the bottom, but as you see, getting into that position using a TRX, and then as I walk forward, I'm increasing my range of motion, or at least trying to increase the degree of range of motion that I'm getting out of the shoulder for external rotation. A shoulder car or shoulder circle, again, whatever you want to call it. Just looking, I'll go ahead and play the video, but starting neutral position, rotating the palm outward, internally rotating, hand finishes, back of the hand to the leg, and then I'm simply reversing that pattern. And then I'll go ahead and show that same exercise from the side view. Again, the idea is we're trying to draw as big of a circle as we possibly can, maximizing that range of motion. Jose?
Yeah, am I on now?
You're on, man.
All right, I apologize, guys. So the next part is what I call it mobility expressions, and this is all the Ido Portal, animal flow, all the different martial art type movements. And at the beginning, when I put this together, I hadn't found any research on it, but this is a research study that they did on quadruped movement training and its effects, and it was very beneficial. But for the interest of time, I'll obviously you guys get this, and you guys can look it up. Go ahead and next slide. All right, so these are my favorites. I mean, there are a lot of different ones, and you know, as you look at these exercises, I want you to just think about three things: total body control, scapular stability, mobility, and trunk stability. And you know, as you look at these exercises, think about all the areas that you're interested in, such as the ankle, the hip, the spine, the shoulders, the whole body. What happens to all those areas when you do these exercises? So as I play these videos, for the interest of time, just think about, look what happens at the ankle, hip, thoracic, whatever. So go ahead and play the video. This was called the ape breach. Go ahead. Notice what's happening in my knee. My ankles, my hips, my thoracic, my shoulders. Am I controlling the posture? Am I controlling the movement? Is it smooth? Is it graceful? You'll be surprised how hard it is to do this exercise if you've never done anything like this. All right, go ahead, next one. Forward, the ape forward again. In order for me to get my hips through, I gotta have dorsiflexion. I gotta have some good hip mobility. And there's a lot of things happening in the thoracic spine and the scapula. All right, next one. Now this is the same thing, but lateral. All right, next one. All right, the beast, the bear crawls. I mean, these everybody does these nowadays, it seems like. This one's a big one for me. You can really see the scapula control. On the next video, you'll see how my left scapula wings a little bit. Let's wait for the other video. See, as you see me going forward in this view, well, I'm sorry, lateral, you see my left scapula winging a lot more than my right. So, you know, as you take these exercises, you can be evaluating these guys. If you know your functional anatomy, if you focus on certain body parts, you can get a lot out of these exercises. Go ahead and play the next one. The crab walk. This one for me, the biggest thing I cue on is in lower trap. In order for me to keep my butt off the ground, I gotta press hard into the ground with my shoulders, and I get a lot of lower trapezius activation. That's a muscle, an area that people misunderstand and still kind of overlook at times when they're working on scapular stability. Go ahead and next one. This is just a side view. All right, on this one, I'm mostly focusing on the hamstring. Each step I take, I want to try to get a real deep stretch. So in order for me to do this exercise, I got to have good dorsiflexion again, good scapular control, hip mobility, and a lot of coordination. All right, next slide. Next Spider-Man. A lot of stuff going on this one. You get deep into the hips. You got to coordinate your arms and legs. You'll get dorsiflexion on the front leg. As you can see, there's just a lot of stuff going on here. All right, next slide. Well, like I said, this is something that Rob and I put together with the purpose of giving you guys ideas, and just to give you a little background on some of those movement expressions. A lot of this stuff, for you guys that don't know, a lot of stuff this comes from martial arts, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. That's a typical warm-up / workout on the ground for minutes on out. If you can control your body on the ground, you can do a lot of things. And I've always been of the opinion that when it comes to training and anything that I offer the guys, I'm always looking at all different sports, all different disciplines, all different methods. I try not to buy into any one thing, but I try to keep it neutral and bring things from other disciplines and other methods and just sprinkle it in and make it my own. How we use these things, you can use that as a standalone workout. If you look at the sets and reps that we put on the slides, you can use it as a standalone workout. Right now, I use it as a warm up for my major league guys during their upper body day, during the off season. So during the on upper body days, we do this as a warm up. We've also used some of these in between sets or as a superset. And I've known people in other teams, like such as football, that use this as a post workout or a type of cool down for their athletes. Again, like I said, these are some of the things that we do that we like. I like to sprinkle things from different methods, and I wanted to give you guys just a little simple presentation on some of the ideas we use, something you can take right now, plug it into your workouts. And these are some of the ideas that you can use to add it to your workout without really disrupting things too much. Rob, you have any closing thoughts?
No, I think you hit most of them on kind of where, a lot of this content fits in. We even throw it into some of our dynamic warm-ups. We may, where you're choosing to integrate it into a program, might decide to do some dorsiflexion work before getting into the squat movement pattern. There's all sorts of options available to us. Even, with some of the growing movement preps for, hitters movement prep, pitchers movement prep, as you get into individualizing programs, a lot of these exercises can be useful with some of those avenues. And then, before we get into the question and answer, just want to thank Jose Vazquez and the Texas Rangers. I know I only got a year over there, but, really enjoyed my experience, learned a ton from you in a short amount of time. And I feel very fortunate to have had the mentors that I have had over this, period of time. And, I'm happy to be able to count you among them. So thank you, Jose. Appreciate you, brother.
Frank, go ahead, take it away.
All right, guys, excellent job, Jose and Rob. Question in the hopper here. When you discuss proper range of motion during these mobility drills, do you describe closing angle discomfort to the athletes?
I think, that's a good point. Really good question. We always want to avoid any closing angle pinches. So we never want to take the athlete to a point where they're feeling pain or discomfort. A real easy workaround, that verbiage is simply asking them to move out of that closing range and move to a comfortable range where they no longer feel any pinching or pain. But that is something very important to note.
Yeah, like Nick talked about earlier, you have to preview things. And in my preview of any of these things, I would say, listen, don't take it to end range. Nothing should hurt. So I always preview any exercise like this with the notion that it should never hurt, because pushing range of motion through pain is never a good thing.
Very good. Another question. Jose, you mentioned the winging of the scaps. With some of those quadruped walks, would you focus more on the protraction during those walks to help correct that, or will the walks themselves, the closed chain, fashion of the quadruped walking, will that by itself help correct the winging?
Well, yeah, no, I promote the protraction. As all throwing athletes, they tend to be, in lat dominant and internally rotated. So protraction is a big key for all of this stuff. When you do a lot of the movement expressions, if there's a lot of winging, then perhaps that exercise is not appropriate at that time. I may still use it as a warm up, but if there's some significant winging, I would not do that. I would do something a little bit more isolated, a little more focused on the protraction and on the scapula itself.
Very good. Any other questions out there? Another one here. Are there certain mobility exercises you avoid with larger groups because of the intricacy of the movement? Are there movements that you find better suited or more comprehensive to get a desired outcome with larger groups?
Yeah. Well, those exercises that I picked them for a reason, because I think they're the easiest to explain. And in my experience, most guys have seen them, some sort of them. So there's not a lot of coaching involved. And it's if you organize it well, you can get, I've done it as big as group as 20. So for the most part, those exercises are pretty simple. And with a little bit of coaching, you can get through, get a good warm up and get by. But those are my favorites because they're the easiest to do in a group.
And then I would add to that. I would just say I agree with what Jose said. And then for some of the other examples that I showed that really are kind of isolating, I think it depends on what the athlete's deficiencies are. Some of those exercises are going to be really easy for athletes to do, and some of them are, especially if there's a limitation, are going to be really difficult and are certainly going to require more coaching and cueing.
Very good. Another question. How have you guys gotten compliance with your Latin players with the CARS movements?
Go ahead, Rob.
Well, one, I would say when, integrating some of this into the program, and as these guys follow their programs, trying to take the time to individually teach each guy what's going on and give them an idea of why we are targeting that specific movement for that player. I think at the end of the day, especially at the major league level, these guys want an advantage. They want to get better. So there really hasn't been a ton of apprehension to want to learn something that's going to overall help a movement quality. But I think once they see that there is a benefit to it, and once they see that they are making improvements, you've got them. Once you've got them, they're yours forever, and they're going to continue to come to you, for more help.
I guess the other thing I would add to that is know your personnel, know who you're dealing with. If it's a guy that seems to be disruptive to the group, maybe perhaps you work on that with that guy individually, and then work with the other group, separately. So just know your personnel, who you can teach that stuff to, and who you can't.
Another question. Do you find that, getting back to the quadruped movements that you had videos of, Jose, that if a guy comes in and a player comes in and they have some level of discomfort while doing it, that if you continue to do it, it corrects itself, the discomfort subsides, or do you modify it and still have them perform the movement?
It depends on their medical history. So if there is discomfort, I would obviously check with the trainers, make sure that there's no issues at the shoulder. We're not dealing with labrums or any kind of winging or nerve damage or any kind of issue that would be the reason for this. If he's medically cleared and it's just a little bit of soreness, because sometimes I personally get a little bit of tenderness around the rhomboid area when I do some of these. And so that subsides. And with some of these exercises, if you do it too long, yeah, you can get really good burn in the thoracic area. So I limit the distance or the reps that they do. You know, I put on there 30 seconds, but sometimes I might just go 5 yards, or I might just go 10 seconds. And I mess with the time
Mhm.
under tension, so to speak, and try to build them up from there.
Great stuff, man. All right. If there are any more questions, go ahead and throw them in the hopper, and Jose and Rob will stick around to answer them, type them back to you. Outstanding job, guys. Again, great content.